crumble all in your ways, so you can sleep at night. All in your ways, so you can wake up and rise.
At the start of the 1950s, racial segregation had been going on for at least 60 years. A lot of Caucasians and African Americans went to separate schools, neighborhoods, hospitals, workplaces, stores, and much more. To Caucasian Americans, a relationship with a Caucasian person and an African American person was utterly repulsive, unethical, and immoral. Interracial couples were often ostracized, shunned, and ridiculed as they never really found acceptance from their community.
My mom told me about once when they were walking down the street and somebody yelled out, like from a car, yelled out, "Nigger lover." And I said, "What did you say?" And she said, I yelled back, "Yeah, I am." We were worried about telling my mom's parents about their relationship. My mom was from a small white town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and her dad was racist. And so they did go up there for my grandparents', I think, 25th anniversary. And everything was okay, but not great. And but she was pretty sure that if you know, they met when they were freshmen in college. Well, she was a freshman in college, and they were pretty sure that if she went home for the summer, they wouldn't be allowed to see each other. So they thought, well, if we get married, then they can't tell us we can't see each other. You know, my mom was talking about how during that time, there was a period where, you know, it was kind of cool in certain circles, you know, to be in an interracial relationship because it was sort of a statement about, you know, what your values were. And she also said that when the Black Power movement came, it became sort of a traitorous thing for a black man to be married to a white woman, and that affected their relationship too, or affected the way other people saw them more.
Richard Perry Loving and Mildred Jeter Loving, an interracial couple who played a significant role in the civil rights movement for miscegenation. The Lovings were an ordinary couple with different racial backgrounds who simply fell in love. Richard, a soft-spoken Caucasian man, Mildred, an intellectual African American and Cherokee woman. Richard and Mildred lived 3 miles from each other and both grew up in Central Point, a small town in Caroline County, Virginia.
When I first met him, I thought it was arrogant, you know. But then I got to know him, and I realized he was a very nice person.
I call Mildred Bean or Beanie sometimes. It's a nickname for string bean. It's because all of our friends gave her that nickname because of how tall and skinny she is.
After dating on and off for a couple years, Mildred discovered she was pregnant and they both decided to get married. Knowing they couldn't get married in Virginia, they traveled up to Washington, D.C. to tie the knot. On June 2nd, 1958, they were married and went back home to Virginia. The only thing the happy couple didn't know was that they could be jailed for it.
You can run around.
One night, Sheriff Garnet Brooks and 2 deputies broke into their home, finding the couple asleep on their bed.
The interesting thing about this is that Sheriff Brooks took 2 deputies with him. Normally, sheriffs go by themselves unless it's a really dangerous case, then he takes backup. So the fact that he took these 2 deputies with him really displays his racism on a clearly non-threatening arrest.
They came one night and they knocked a couple times. I heard them before I could get up. They just broke down the door and came on in. When we got up, they were standing beside the bed with flashlights.
They asked Richard who he was sleeping with, and I said, "I'm his wife." And the sheriff said, "Not here, you're not."
After being arrested, they were taken to jail. Richard spent 1 night behind bars before being bailed out, but Mildred's racial status made it harder to raise bail. Richard could not speak to his wife or bail her out while she was alone in the jail for 5 days.
Jail was the worst time of my life. The jail was small, unhygienic, and rat-infested. It's terribly frightening.
Almighty God created the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and He placed them on separate continents. And but for the interference with His arrangement, there would be no cause for such marriages. The fact that He separated the races shows that He did not intend for the races to mix.
Richard and Mildred eventually went to court, and Judge Leon Bazile convicted them for the felony of miscegenation. They had violated Virginia's Racial Integrity Act, which made it unlawful for any white person in the state to marry anyone except a white person. The Lovings pleaded guilty in exchange for a 1-year sentence. Bazile then suspended the sentence, but they had to agree to the judge's terms. They were to leave the state of Virginia for 25 years. Richard and Mildred could return one by one to Virginia, but not with each other. If they were caught going back together, they would have to do time. They spent their days in Washington, D.C. after exile. Mildred wasn't accustomed to city life. She was used to the open space and fresh air in Virginia.
There was no space for the children to play in. Everything was crowded. Everything was sealed behind bars. It was awful.
Although they chose to not live in Virginia, the Lovings took a risk by living in Virginia secretly. They lied to the State Department and reported to the government that they were living in Washington, D.C. Sick of the conditions and wanting better for her family, Mildred wrote a letter to attorney Robert Kennedy, who then recommended her to write to the American Civil Liberties Union. A week later, Mr. Bernard Cohen called Mildred, saying he would take the case.
Cohen immediately understood the challenges of the case. He knew it'd likely take years to resolve and might as well go all the way to the US Supreme Court. Cohen also believed the chances of winning were high and made better by the plaintiff's last name.
First, Cohen appealed to Judge Bazile to reconsider the case. Bazile's decision in January 1965 showed them just what they were up against. Cohen and his law partner, Philip Hirschkup, appealed the case through state and federal courts. Finally, in April 1967, Loving v. Virginia reached the U.S. Supreme Court. The night before the lawyers made their arguments, Cohen asked Richard if there was anything he wanted the justices of the Supreme Court to know.
I said to him, tell the court that I love my wife, and it's just unfair that I can't live with her in Virginia.
2 months later, on June 12, the court unanimously backed the Lovings, ruling that Virginia's law violated the 14th Amendment. Under the Constitution, the freedom to marry a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state. Talking to a reporter that day, Cohen emphasized the importance of the ruling for the country. For the Lovings, things were simpler.
I feel free now.
The court case took up 9 years of their lives. The Lovings not only focused with the aspect of civil rights, were mainly focused on the right to live happily and freely in love with each other. As stated by their attorney and close friend, Cohen,
"We hope we have put to rest the last of racial discrimination that were supported by law in Virginia and all over the country."
50 years later, attitudes towards interracial marriage have transformed dramatically. Interracial marriage in America increased rapidly. Society became more accepting and changed many lives forever.